Hello! Today we're going to be looking at something that some of us find even harder than writing critical essays. In episode 4 of... Okay, so today we're going to be looking at how to write a creative story that's good in less than a day. A lot of the time what happens is we're spending days, if not weeks, writing a particular creative story. And because of the new syllabus, we don't even know if we're going to get a specific chance to use it. I am a strong believer in having a creative story written down, just so you have a kind of idea or a kind of story in your head that you could try and manipulate in exam situations. And it's just good to always have a particular story that you've thought out well, which is an engaging read and insightful. And it's hard to do that just on the spot. I'm definitely not one of the people who can write something on the spot and have it be engaging and insightful and all kinds of amazing. So doing preparation, figuring out the exact way I want to say a particular thing or express a particular feeling is a great way to go about it. So today we're going to be going through that specific process. And today I'm just going to be showing you the process that I've used to write creatives, to write good stories. Before we start with today's lesson, I would just like for all of you guys to just head down to the description below and have a look at the link that is attached to a short story. I would love for you to have a read of that story. That story is less than 500 words, so should not take you more than 2 or 3 minutes. Have a read of it and then come back to this video. Okay, so I'm assuming you have read the story now. I really hope you have. It's called Molly and Me, which you would know by now. I would love for you to guess how old you think the person was who wrote this. So I'll give you like 3 seconds. Do you have a number in mind? Okay, so the person who wrote this was 10 years old and he was in year 5. And he wrote the story in 90 minutes. And of course we went through edits and drafts within those 90 minutes, but that's how long it took. And today I'm going to take you through that process of what are some good tips and tricks for writing a good creative and laying out a basic process from which you can start developing your story. So what I did is I essentially ran my student through a workshop exercise. So what I'm going to do is take you guys through the same workshop. I'd love for you guys to be sitting on a desk, have a book out, have a pen out, and let's go through this together. So make sure you're doing this exercise with loads of space. Each thing that you write will have stuff to write underneath. First step is to remember 2 really happy or sad events. So either one happy, one sad, both can be sad, both can be happy, but they have to be 2 really strong events that have happened or transpired in your life where you felt really strongly, either felt really happy or felt really sad, and jot those down. Just write the name, write number 1, write the name of the event, and then 2, write the name of that event. So your event can be really happy or really sad. The point is it has to be something that you felt really strongly. It doesn't have to be exactly happy or sad, but it has to be an emotion that you felt incredibly intensely. Then underneath that event, write 3 bullet points, and for each bullet point, write an emotion that you felt. So let me give you an example of what my student wrote. His name is Neil. The 2 events that he talked about was him finding out that he's going to have a baby sister and him going on an airplane for the first time, which made him really scared. So that's what he wrote for his 2 events. Now for his emotions, I wish I had the book that we used, but it was his book, so it's obviously with him. But underneath that, we wrote the exact feelings. So underneath having a baby sister, he wrote really happy, excited. He only wrote 2 feelings underneath that, and then only 1 for the airplane one. But again, he was 10 years old. I'm assuming that you guys are a lot older. So I would urge you guys to write about at least 3 feelings, 3 specific emotions that are different from one another. Try to recount that event in your head as much as possible, and with it next to each emotion that you've written down, try to remember how you actually displayed that emotion. If you were really happy, what were you doing? If you're really happy, maybe you were consistently nudging the person next to you. If you're really sad, you were just sitting there and nodding along and not really saying much. But make sure you're talking about how you physically displayed those emotions. Okay, now once you have those, now you have a very rough dramatic frame which we can start with. Now choose one of the two stories. Make sure that you were doing all those steps for both of those stories, and choose one of the two events, one that you felt more strongly. Not, it doesn't have to be the one you like more, but the one you feel more strongly about, the one that affected you a lot more. Now I'm going to tell you essentially what I did with my student Neil. So once we did all of those steps, what I asked him was, how did the exact story take place? And as he was telling me, I was writing it down furiously, like whatever he was saying, as he was saying it. So what I would recommend you do is turn on voice memos on your iPhone, or if you have an Android, go buy an iPhone and then turn voice memos on that, and start recounting that story word for word, event for event, every single small minute detail that happens you need to go through. So I'll show you what I wrote with Neil, and I'll tell you the exact way that he told me the story. He told me that his mum was at the hospital and the nurse found out, and the nurse called his dad, and then his dad told him. And that's how the story starts. My mum whispered something into the nurse's ear, who then spoke to my dad over the phone, who came over to me and whispered in my ear. I only helped Neil with his expression and changing some things up near the end, helping him dramatize the story a little bit more so that it has a narrative arc. But choosing a particular event that you've already gone through is really, really significant. Now, I'll run you through the why this workshop is effective part near the end if you're interested. But for now, let's just keep running through the workshop. And the next thing he told me was that he got really, really happy, and then he felt his heart beat really, really fast. And then this is his exact words. He said, you know how sometimes you get an award, you start crying, but it was happy tears. Those were his words. Now, him being 10, the way that he speaks is going to be completely different to the way, he's going to speak a year later, a year or two later. So I really wanted him to preserve that childlike innocence that he had. And the same way, I really want you guys to preserve the way that you speak right now. All of you are incredibly, incredibly intelligent and really insightful and entertaining to talk to. I have seen that across every single student that I've ever taught. Every single one of you has something that is so exciting that's going on that is just unique to you. And the best creative stories are ones that preserve that part about yourself. And then, he said they were happy tears, not sad ones. And then he said, but after a year, there were sad tears. And then he kept telling me, she poos everywhere, she hits me, she eats all my food, she does this, she does that. And he essentially started talking about how, his initial feeling of, this huge happiness that he had in his life was now like he was like sick all the time, and then he was being hit all the time, and essentially how his life got turned upside down. And I was writing everything down exactly the way he said it. And even the term where he says, but the worst thing was that when you're not potty trained, there are accidents. And that's exactly how he said it as well. He said, the worst thing is if you're not potty trained, and then he gave like a dramatic pause, and he's like, there are accidents. And he's like a really, really cheeky, he's a really cheeky boy as well. So I really wanted to make sure that we're preserving those things. Now, unless you have a person there who is willing to, write down furiously as you're talking, I strongly recommend that you turn on your voice memos. Don't think about writing a story. Think about telling that story to someone who you're close to. And that's it. Like, you're trying to entertain them and engage them. That's all you need to be doing. So that's roughly where he was with me. And then after that point, once we had that dramatic frame, then this is the part where you get to embellish. This is the part where you can dramatize. Because he is a family friend, he is my mom's best friend's son. And I've known him for the past 8 years or so I knew him when he was really little. And he was 3 years old, 4 years old. I have known him since then. So I started talking to him about how he was really violent when he was growing up. When he was a little baby, he would hit everyone. And, he probably pooed everywhere and things like that. And the way that he reacted to those revelations was also something that I wrote down. Right? I noted down how he was shocked, how he was surprised, and he was just in complete disbelief that he went through the exact same thing. Or I was talking to him about how, his sister is not going to be like that for the rest of your life. She's going to grow up one day, but with parts of that, with her growing up, yes, she won't hit you anymore, but then there are also parts of her that you'll be losing. And that revelation at the end kind of provided a narrative arc for us. And it was, again, everything to do with this story came from Neil. Right? I was just there to help him shape it a little bit better. Even the part that he's at his grandma's house was something that he was bringing up, that he went to his grandma's house and he was looking at how there were just photos of his grandparents, his parents, and then him. There wasn't Molly up there yet. And he was like getting really giddy about that, the good old days. And those are the exact terms that he used. So then using that as a narrative frame, I brought his grandmother in as the character who helps him with this revelation. But the part at the end is what I really want us to focus on. After they go through that whole conversation and the protagonist kind of realizes that, oh, my sister isn't going to be little forever, the way that you show that realization has to be really subtle. It has to be kind of a nod to that realization. And that's what HSC markers really love. They love something that's, just a little nod to, oh, this person is slowly showing change. What happens in a lot of our stories when we're in year 11, year 12 is that we tend to show dramatic transformations over the course of 400, 500, 600 word stories. And not only are those unrealistic, but they're also kind of boring. To see a character go through such a radical transformation over the course of 500 or 600 words is just not that interesting. It's better to build up the interesting parts of what might be wrong with that protagonist or that particular character, and then explore those facets. And let's just recount how the story ends. And one day Molly will grow up and she won't hit me and she won't sneeze on me. Yes. And one day you won't be able to squeeze her cheeks like you do now. And one day she won't be waiting impatiently at the door as you come home from school. And one day you won't be the only person that she finds the most special. But you'll always be my sister, right? Well, yes, but you won't always be your little sister. My ears perk up and my nose fills with a familiar stench, and I know that Molly has done it again. Well, Nani, I don't know how many of these accidents I have left. I better go and help my mom change the diapers. So this is a great example of show, not tell, right? And this was a part that I was helping him better understand, that if the fact that your sister is growing up and that this time isn't going to come back, then all these little things are things that you should savor. And this would be a fantastic way to show that. This was a part that I helped him with. But the majority of the story, like 95% of the story, as you can see, came directly from him. And that's exactly what you should be working towards as well. You should be taking an experience that you have lived through. Why? Because all good writers have an extraordinary ability to empathize, which means that they can create an imaginary character and then an imaginary setting for that character, then imaginary scenarios for that character to go through, the exact conflicts in those scenarios, and then imagine how that character would feel going through that particular scenario. These are a lot of levels of imagination, right? And when you're in year 12, some of us are gifted. Some of us do have that sense of empathy intuitively built in, or they've been reading and writing for a really long time. So by the time they're in year 11, year 12, they already have that ability really well developed. I was definitely not one of those people. And judging by the amount of students I've come across, finding students like those are quite rare. And if you are, kind of like most people and a person who is not super into, writing or not super great at writing, then using this process, using a personal experience that you've gone through and then dramatizing it is the best way to write a good creative story. And the best part is no one needs to know that it's a real experience that you went through. Your teacher is never going to ask, oh, is this something you really went through? Did this happen? No one asks that. Right? So you can go towards any particular experience that you've gone through. But make sure once you have that dramatic frame, you also make a narrative arc. Your story needs to go through some form of a typical narrative, which is having a complication and sort of a resolution. It doesn't necessarily need to have a resolution, but there needs to be kind of a build-up, a kind of climax. And here's a little bonus tip. Because your story will be based on a particular experience that you've gone through, when you're describing the setting of that particular place, close your eyes and just say everything that you can see, which is what I made Neil do. So especially at the part where he said, we're at my grandma's, my nanny's house right now, and I'm sitting on the resting chair. Opposite me are the photos from the good old days of my grandparents, my nanny, my parents, and me. I'm looking at my solo portrait. So for just writing those 3 lines, I made him close his eyes. He did an exercise, and he essentially described the entire room. Right? And that's what it should be. It should be like you have closed your eyes, you're in that place, and you're describing what that room is like to someone else, or what that place is like to someone else. Having descriptions in there that are succinct, but still give a very specific description of what a particular room or a particular setting looks like will always work to your advantage, because you're hooking the reader in and taking them a level deeper into your story. And lastly, make sure that the creative choices that you make within your creative are always supported by your purpose. What is it that you're trying to explore? And that's important because you need to write a reflection. I don't know of any schools that have asked for creatives that haven't asked for a reflection directly after. Even when you're writing discursives now, schools are asking for reflection. So I'll be making a video on writing reflections as part of, the second half of writing a creative assessment. But even though I'm going to make a separate video on reflections, I might just do a little breakdown within this video. So while we didn't write a reflection for this piece, and I definitely haven't planned one, I'm definitely going to wing this on the spot and see how we go. So step number one is always understanding what is the purpose. So understanding what is the purpose of your story and specifying that from the get-go is the most important thing you need to do in your reflection. Now, the second thing that you go on is essentially, how did you achieve your purpose? Now, a lot of students straight away dive into things like quotes and techniques, but that's not the best way to go about it. You want to have kind of a top-down approach, which means that you look at your text from back here first. Look at the big picture, right? Look at the macro features. So macro with M-A-C-R-O. Macro features refer to things like structure and the overall writing style that you employ. Now, I'm going to be Dora the Explorer for a second. Can you spot the two structural features that we used in this creative story? That's correct. It was linear storytelling and first-person narration. So, what is linear storytelling and what is first-person narration? First-person narration is when you use personal pronouns, like I or me, right? And what is linear storytelling? Linear storytelling means that you just told the story how it happened, in a straight line, right? That's what linear storytelling means. Now, we have to essentially say, why did we use these particular structures? And this is why it's really important when you're writing a creative story to use techniques and structures that are directly achieving your purpose, right? Now, I'm one of the people who kind of gets annoyed when I have to start writing with a purpose already in mind. I am the kind of person who likes writing whatever he can think of for fun, and then finding a purpose later on with which I can make my work more directed and more specific or targeted towards a particular point. But my first draft or my first attempt at creating work is always to go along with the thought of something that I find entertaining or engaging or fun. And it's something that I strongly recommend as well. But when you're at that process of redrafting, you now need to start thinking of, what is my purpose? Once you have your purpose down, that's when you start looking at structures that directly help you achieve that purpose. Now, our purpose was to show how a little kid or a 10-year-old kid is going through a process of, the coming of age process and learning to develop empathy. And we wrote about that in the first person, or we used the first person narration or first person writing style or first person perspective, because that transports the readers directly into the psyche of this 10-year-old child. And by doing so, what we're able to accomplish is give readers a very intimate access into the protagonist's innermost feelings, thoughts, and ideas, which is important in a story where we're trying to show how this character goes through a specific transformation. That tells us why we use the first person narration. And then on top of that, you would, talk about why you wrote it in a linear fashion. So keep in mind, guys, like even when you think you've written a really simple story where you can't really spot any techniques, there are such obvious ones like the linear storytelling. Either you wrote your story in a linear fashion or you didn't. Either way, that's at least one technique for you to analyze. Second thing is you either wrote your story in first person, second person, third person, or a blend of the three, right? Either way, those are two things that you already have to talk about. Those structural features should not be escaping you. So continuing the way that I would talk about the linear storytelling would be something like by using a linear writing style or by writing the story in a linear fashion, you are able to mimic the way that this transformation would have played out in real life. And therefore, you're able to show the stages of transformation more explicitly. You're able to hook audiences in with the inciting incident of the protagonist finding out that he's about to have a sister. And then there is, the rising tension where the protagonist's previous joyous expectations are now subverted into complaints. And then at the end, you have this section, or the climax and resolution, where this persona is kind of going through this process of understanding and coming out changed. Now, speaking of audience, this is the other big thing that students really miss out in reflections. Now, this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about in this video, because it originally started out as a creative workshop and now we're here. But audience is something that you really, 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 really want to be specific on, right? Instead of saying something like, this story is for young adults, this story is for mature adults, this story is for people who are 18 and above. Don't do that. I made that mistake. And I'll talk more about that in my video about writing reflections. But thank you so, so much for coming to this creative workshop. And I hope that you're walking away feeling a little bit more confident in how to start writing creative. And that's it for class today, guys. Thank you so much for coming. If there are any comments, please leave them down below. If you need help with a specific concept, leave it down below and I'll definitely get to it. And as always, remember to take a shower. That's good.